I think we're in the spectacular one today. It's the Hollywood one, really. It's obviously meant for huge presenters, but we are tackling what is actually a very topical subject of the changing nature of AV in education, and it's pretty hot actually. And what we're unsure about is how representative this change is across Europe. We've had lots of discussions in the UK with our higher education establishments, but we've discussed a range of issues, and we'd like to just really find out what's going on across the water, if you like, and actually get some European views. And we have no better representatives for those than my panel here today, who are the biggest users and the biggest universities, really. To my left is Marcus Saunders, Head of Digital Learning Resources at London College of Fashion, University of the Arts. To his left is Magnus Lian. My inability to pronounce proper Norwegian, he's got a far more impressive name than that, but I can't get my tongue around it. He's a multimedia producer. Well, what do you call yourself? You've got an intriguing LinkedIn profile, but it's much more than that, isn't it?
A little bit of everything, yeah.
A little bit of everything. That's typical AV, isn't it?
Yeah.
At NTNU, which is the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, which is now the largest university in Norway, with about just over 40,000 students in 3 cities, so it's massive. And to his left is Christian Brondbo. Now I've got you director of ATEA, the integrator. Well, you work closely, haven't you, with Magnus? Well, I don't mean in that sense, but professionally speaking,
Yes.
you've had a close working relationship, haven't you?
It's good news to me that I've become the director now, because then I up my salaries. But I'm a systems designer.
Well, my role is to make you look good.
Yes.
And whatever we say here, it obviously has an increase in salaries. So, having it filmed, we've now got the sound working, thanks to my colleague at the back. Thank you very much. So, this will go down in posterity to your grandchildren. So, it's, at the very least, you'll have a pay rise at the end of it. So that's very good.
I think so too.
Again, being half blind, I have to keep manipulating my spectacles. Sorry about all this. Right. I suppose it's very difficult to actually start with opening questions really here, but we've been talking for quite a while about user expectations and requirements and so on, and it always struck me, with so many things going on in the higher education space at the moment, is how you gauge user expectations and start to plan for it long before the technology comes about. You've both been involved in some fast-moving technological change in both your environments. How have you gone about it? I mean, is it usually dictated by the university hierarchy, or can you actually do a sort of roadmap of where generally technology is going, and therefore have a sort of best practice approach to how a university can be equipped?
For our sake, it actually started from the students that wanted to have more interactive learning. And we started from there. So it's a large project, started us like 2 years ago. We had to find new ways of how we can build new auditoriums or learning spaces. So before this, we were just building flat rooms for group work, but big auditoriums for all the lectures. But now we want to rebuild many of our auditoriums to make it more into a group space, so all the groups can sit and work together. And this was the students that wanted this, and then also the teacher heard the students, and they want to move forward with that, and then the university started this project.
How do you? What led to the students driving this? Really, what led to them saying we want a bigger space to work in? I mean, it sounds straightforward. I'm sure it wasn't.
I think they're more used to in college. It's more they're more used to working in groups there, and they also just want a little bit more interaction in the lectures. They don't want to sit there and just passively get information from the teacher. So it's more they want to be more active in the class. Of course, this is not for everybody, but the student council at our university found that most of the students would have a better profit from that.
Yeah. Marcus,
I think there are.
Can you hear us, by the way, at the back?
Can you hear me?
Say if you can't, okay?
Hello. Can everybody hear me? No.
It's not coming through. Is it all right your end?
Okay. So I think I'm going to answer the question in 2 parts. I think first of all, technology shouldn't drive those decisions. I think it should be the learning and teaching objectives that you have in the space. Just as you're saying, you should work backwards from the outcome that you hope to achieve in a given space. I think there's a trend in HE at the moment away from the large lecture space, the raked, tiered lecture theatre. University of Northampton's a good example. We met with one of the AV leaders there in the LTSMG conference. They have one lecture theatre in a new build campus building, and everything else is flat. For me, one of the big drivers is the campus redevelopment projects. So there's the user experience, the student experience, which is incredibly important. Actually, I think that should be at the core. So you work backwards from the student need.
What is the student experience? I don't want to interrupt you, but you know, what is the student experience? I'd love to know.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky, nebulous thing to pin down. You have to work with students and understand how they're thinking, because the way they think changes rapidly and develops rapidly. We have people coming in from a very different type of schooling, with very different sets of expectations. And that's driving change within the technical teams. People are aware of this, but I don't think the pedagogy in universities has shifted as quickly perhaps as secondary education or tertiary education. So tertiary education needs to catch up with that movement. That spectrum is also, there are some tensions there, because the delivery method, the kind of broadcast didactic method of lecturing has been around for hundreds of years, and the active learning models that we're now seeing and promoting those active learning models isn't that easy. It's about redeveloping the curricular design, and then I think that should shape the environment, not the other way around.
It's very interesting to know what comes first, isn't chicken or the egg, I suppose, really. But as it's happened over the last couple of years, I mean, you know, I have to say I'm from a generation that found the existing teaching methods fine, but you can understand how a different generation of how they think and use technology has driven what they require if they're paying large amounts of money out and require the basic services of being able to, take part in their education process. So the way they store information, record information, and so on, clearly requires modern tools, and that's just an advance of it. I mean, I was going to ask later on in the session just quite how schools are driving. I don't know what's happening in Europe, in Norway, but how you don't get a clear idea in the UK of how advanced with technology schools are and whether they drive the higher education process or not, and whether there are expectations at that early level. You know later on that businesses are looking very much for well-educated, tooled-up students that they expect will have got that information from universities, from the environments they've been working in. But the previous generation, up from schools into universities, you're not quite sure how they're expecting it, whether it's just been a social media wrap-up, and therefore they're thinking along those lines when they go into university. Very difficult to sort of understand.
I think a university education is the sum of all of the different parts.
It's nebulous, isn't it?
Yeah,
almost?
it's about that overall experience. But I think what we should, if we are technologists working in the higher education sector, then we should be looking at the graduate attributes on the way out of that system, and just make sure that we've prepared students to operate in the workplace that we're intending them to go into. And I think there's, at the moment, a slight disconnect between perhaps how universities view their ecologies and the workplace.
What expectations, Magnus, do students have when they come to your university? I mean, do they have very high expectations? I mean, what's driven this major expansion? Has it been the way the university has grown and brought together a large number, and therefore you've had to rethink how you deliver services?
I think they have really large expectations when they first get there, but then when they got used to being there for 1 year, I think it drops really dramatically. So
it's not that bad, surely.
Yeah, so we're kind of trying to catch up with that right now, because it's been just the same thing for all day life of the university. So this is really exciting times, and we see a lot of the students getting really excited when they get into the new rooms now. So we have a lot of new excitement coming up because they see we are kind of supporting more of sharing content from the students and sharing content between students within the auditorium. So we're using a lot of tech to make that available, and and the gratitude for the students is rising really much. So we see they're much more happy in these new rooms than they are in the previous rooms. So I think their expectation is getting higher once they've been there. So now we have to just follow up on that and have more of these rooms, because it's just pilots right now actually. So we need the more broad build out.
So you're learning at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry, come.
I know, I'm just like a sponge here now, because I get two end users feeding in the information here. So.
Well, I'm going to be putting you on the spot in a moment. Don't get too comfortable. I'll be down your end in a minute.
One thing to add to that, I think it's really important that the technology that we put into active spaces, so even if these are pilot type spaces, it's very much about the networks of how students network amongst themselves and with the facilitator, the lecturer, in that case. And sometimes that isn't necessarily about the physical environment or the technology that's been used. It's about how you present the right environment for students to thrive around their network building ability, communication, collaboration. So again, working backwards from what the collaborative objectives are in the first place, and then creating the right technical response is incredibly important.
What are you trying to achieve with these pilots? Have you got, how long are they? And how wide? What sort of pilots are they?
Some of them started 1 year ago, and then we will probably run them one more year. But it's mostly we're building a lot of new buildings at our campus, so it's just we're trying to find a standard for the new rooms. So the pilots will go on as long as the rooms are there, but we will still doing adjustments. So right now we're constantly redoing the curriculum programming and what equipment put in the rooms. So it will always be ongoing. But I think we're now seeing how we will build the rooms. So we're testing different things, and some of
So are you seeing what works and what doesn't work?
Yeah, absolutely. So
what was your starting point?
Starting point was just the tables actually, so no technology point there. We just wanted to make a space where students can sit in groups and work together. But then we soon found that when we put a screen up there, then the students get this common surface where they're working on, and then it gets much better instead of they just working on their own laptops. And so that is something we're implementing in all the rooms. We're also trying with writable displays and stuff, but some of things works and some of them.
I have a question for you about interactive displays, interactive panels. You stand in front of them when you use them, and that's inherently an obstacle for collaboration. I think in the school sector, there's a very different approach, because lots of people are invited up and add to the display and then move away. But in an HE context, I'm not overly convinced that the interactive display that you stand in front of, blocking most of the time in front of the audience, is the right model. What are your thoughts?
We are also considering the same thing. So in the next room we're building now, it will not be interactive screens. So it's just a matter. Also, it's a cost versus. We have to spend a lot of money to get a good screen. So the screens we brought now is like they're good enough to do simple things, but not to write a whole lecture. So it's all about time. Also, we now see a lot of new screens here, of course. So when the cost comes down and it's much easier to use them, then it will get much better use, because now it's also a little bit of hassle to get all the laptops up and working on the screens and stuff like that. So. Yeah.
Christian, do you have a role to play in this pilot process, of your experience of what works well together, what doesn't, presumably?
Well, we're a lot of this technology is quite new, so we're from an integrator standpoint, we are also with the same learning curve as the customers are now. But when it comes to the interactive displays, a lot of this bring your own disaster, as I tend to call them, units now allows both to do annotations both on the display but also on the user's own device. So you can choose to go and do some annotations on the display, or you can just take up your smartboard, like a laptop, iPad, your smartphone, whatever, and do the annotations there as well. So the user interfaces you have available now to do a good collaboration are quite a few more than it was just a few years ago. And also now you can have multiple users doing it simultaneously.
We talked earlier in this, didn't we? Your point you made about user interfaces and how crucial they were. Is that a point that people take on board? I mean, I don't know how appalling training is and how low down the priority list it can be, but in terms of actually functional design, in IT, the user interface was top of the tree. Really.
Yeah, I mean, I think user experience rather than interface is the thing that we should all be focused on. It's about looking at that in the round, about the whole experience of using the room, trying to get as much of the technology actually out of the way, so that, in fact, that the active learning pedagogy that we're trying to support and invoke in that space can freely flow in the space. I think the bit that's missing, and it's an interesting kind of maybe slightly different viewpoint, but I think universities are probably a good place to prototype and to contribute to that design process. I think we need to take more control of that process because we understand students and the use cases for those students and the lecturers, and that students and lecturers often have a very different perspective on what that user experience should be. So, we're caught somewhere in the middle, and we are probably the best brokers of that design process.
I mean, it's something the corporate world is just beginning to think about, mainly from a commercial point of view, rather than actually relevance of technology to the person using it point of view, which is where you're coming from. Yeah. That's the more purist version, and actually the only version. It's so funny how you think, well, that didn't work very well because no one used it, and therefore we've lost his money. Not the quiet thing, well, that person wasn't productive and therefore didn't do what we thought they'd do and achieve what they did. And that, they should have no monetary value. That's just effectiveness of technology in the environment. Yeah. And that's just overlooked, but now it's being brought to the attention to most people. It's how you set this formal process together as a process evaluation. Yeah. Is that part of? I mean, is there a best practice approach we can take to all this? When we look, are there stages we can go through? Which is when we originally had our chats about this. Are we building up a sort of best practice approach to populating new campuses as we're building more of them now? We're going through a major building phase on a lot of campuses, aren't we? Are we learning through that, or?
I think it's been very flat for a very, very long time. And now we have some very interesting new pieces of Lego out there to go and play with. We've got lots of new building blocks, and the experimentation is really just beginning. I think there's probably a tendency, certainly in the UK market, to rely on integrators for that part of the process. And I genuinely think we should take a long, hard look at how we go about building rooms, because we tend to follow a set pattern. And I think that paradigm needs to shift slightly. I think we need to reduce the number of components and think about that user experience as the central key.
Is that what the industry has forced upon you?
I think there's a heritage of copper-joined infrastructure that's shifted. We're now a packet-based discipline, essentially. If you look at it like that, the AV over IP transition is well underway. And we're not there yet, but it's well underway. And I think that's the point that we need to change our discipline so that we fully reap the benefit of the advantages of a packet-based methodology.
This is also what we found when we started the first AV over IP project. So the first installation we did became the largest one in Europe. So we had quite a steep learning curve, but what we found was that from before, when we have this HD-based T matrices and stuff, we were focusing on AV systems within one room. Yeah, and then we multiply this for how many rooms we need these features in. But now we have AV over IP, so we built built the whole system around enterprise-grade infrastructure. So each source in every lecture room, auditorium, could in theory be displayed on any screen, projector, whatever around in that building. So that is something also for these guys to shift their mindset from room by room to how do we want this building to work, because you don't need so many huge auditoriums anymore. You can have smaller auditoriums, and when enough students show up for that lecture, you can just take the people who didn't get a chair in the auditorium, guide them to a lecture room, set up a connection. They will have the same audio quality, the same video quality, the same presentation, and they can also ask questions back to the lecturer from another room, not even in the same floor. It could be an adjacent building, but as long as the systems are connected, you get a whole new perspective on how you can design the technology, which also makes it more future-proof and more flexible. So, because they know that the usage they have for a lecture room today may not or will not probably be the same needs they have in 5 years. But when you have AV over IP infrastructure, which is, when it's built good, the changes or adaptation to the new needs are quite easier.
I think we're currently building 2 new campus buildings, one in Elephant and Castle, one on the Olympic Park in Stratford, and they're both kind of 14-story greenfield new build campus buildings. And the infrastructure there, we won't be buying AV switching hardware. I think that's one of the really sort of clear messages, that the switch stack, the core switch of those buildings, that's the AV switch. And we've got to start thinking like that as a discipline in our practice, because that is, just as you're saying, it's about a district approach and an enterprise IT approach, essentially, to the problem. So it's looking at the problem from a different angle. But I think that's where we've got a bit of a skills issue. I think we need to think about how we cross-pollinate and learn from we stand on the shoulders of the other types of building systems that have transformed over the last decade. Enterprise IT is now very refined, very mature in its approach. Building management systems, the integration of building management systems, etc. AV is really the last one to go in the context of a whole building design. So I'm really glad that when I worked on a building for the University of Oxford a few years ago, we weren't there. We couldn't do it. We could sort of build a hybrid model, but there still had to be some segregation. There still had to be some certainty around the network conditions for the AV over IP components. But now we can build a fully converged building, and that is very much about well, if you have a controller, you have a controller as a service that runs across the entire estate. We're 14 buildings around London. We would just want to put one controller in our data center, and the panels in the rooms are tied into that platform. That, to me, is an IT response to the problem that allows you to have all of the customizations and all of the benefits at scale that you would have with a single room.
Another key benefit with this is that the universities already have service agreements with the manufacturers of the switches, which is usually a next day replacement. So they don't have to wait for their system integrator to send out a service technician, which has to pull out a proprietary AV matrix frame and send that for service, and you take the whole room out of service for a week or two. But here you can have the one of the
components,
you get a new switch the next day. Maybe you have a spare already, because it's the same switches you use all over the campus from before. The configuration of the switches are stored on a server, so you just smack in a new one, connected, it will automatically get the right configuration, and the whatever guy from the IT department can do that replacement. And so you will have a lot more uptime, and also the most enterprise grade network switches are built to work at the bottom of the sea. So like the mean time before failure on those components are 1 million hours or something.
I think building into the architecture resilience and redundancy in a way that you would for an enterprise IT infrastructure, and thinking about that in the context of AV systems, we're starting to see appliances. I'm trying a couple at the moment. There are some on the show floor here this year that everything has 2 ports. It's all got that. It's got the resilience built in. It'll reroute traffic if one port falls over or if the switch goes down. So we can start to build the types. We can get the benefits that people in our colleagues in the IT industry have had for years. So why wouldn't we want to take advantage of that?
I mean, that's why there's so many good cooperations, isn't there, between AV and IT? But it seems quite seamless when you explain it like that. Is it really seamless?
No.
Yeah, I do wonder. I mean, you make it sound so simple the way you explain it.
It's a young
but
discipline.
I'm sure it isn't.
It's a very young discipline. We've got to build the talent and the skill around this discipline, and that's about really genuinely understanding that AV integrators, manufacturers, universities, customers, corporates have a responsibility to start to understand that mesh and perhaps to invest in that cross-pollination of skill sets. I don't think we do that as well as we should at the moment.
Well, there's a difference, isn't there, between skills, which inevitably come with a change, and approach, which you've explained is the approach, and you perhaps don't need the intense skills that perhaps you need. That will come later on, but it's more important.
Skills.
Yes, completely different. And it's a question of which comes first, really. I think the attitude change and approach is probably the early stage, and then close working with IT. Because I do wonder, where the skills are going to come from and who's going to have them, and how they are going to mesh with IT.
I still think that the fundamental, the role of an AV person, whether that's a technician or an architect or an engineer, starts with the end user, with the user experience. And I think that's what AV people bring to, certainly in universities. I have a team of technicians. I can see there's a colleague over there sitting in the audience from Couldwell College of Art. And I think the primary piece of work that we underestimate is the people skills involved in supporting learning and teaching in classrooms, because that's actually what AV technicians do. They support, in universities, they support learning and teaching in classrooms. And then the technology that's applied to that space is secondary. Actually, the lecturer wants things to work a certain way quickly. They want to walk into a room and be ready in 30 seconds to go with whatever it is they want to do. Otherwise, the technology is getting in the way. But as a facilitator of the student experience, I think that people aspect is very, very important. And then the skills are secondary.
You're nodding there, Magnus. Is that the same cultural thing in Norway?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are the ones that are talking to the teachers and know the needs of the teachers. So we're working closely with the IT department, of course, but they are doing this in a really IT way, and that is not that user-focused as we want it to be. So we're having a little bit struggle now, but we want we don't want the whole AV business to go into IT, because it's really many differences there, because we have much more user focused, and we're definitely using a lot of our times to just talk to lecturers and know. So in these pilots we're running now, we have a large number of lecturers from different departments and students also, so they come in and we interview them and how they want to do the teaching. So all the technology we're building is just functions that they really want to get their teaching being better. So
some universities have integrated their AV teams into the IT function. Adam is a good example over there, so you can talk to him afterwards about those experiences. But it's been a very positive experience, right? Right. I think that's where we're headed. I think it's that it's no longer that these are two different disciplines or two different tribes, if you like, that they're actually a joined up piece of work for the university across a number of disciplines.
I think it's always been, I think we discussed it at our last meeting we went to actually, there's no powerful combination, and by you engaging with the academic staff, there's no powerful combination that when they get more engaged and they get skilled up themselves as that's possible, and they can add a valuable amount of stuff to the mix. I think it's a hugely wasted potential. These are clever people, they want to, I think we had this comment I made when we had this comment before about, I've grown up with hugely inspirational lectures and communicators that seems somewhat to have been lost, in a sense, that technology is somehow facilitating something that's been lost. But it's not, is it? I mean, these people can do all kinds of things with technology and do amazing things, a bit like TED Talk stuff. And it's extraordinary what they can create. And getting them engaged in an AV experience, it must be incredibly powerful as a lecturing experience in an environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this one test also in one of the rooms. We're building just a video booth where one of the teachers had this idea was when the groups are working together, they can go each group in and do, instead of answer a paper, they just go in the video booth and do a short video recording, and then they swap around the video recordings in the groups, and they kind of look at each other's videos, and then the teacher then again puts up the videos and looks through them. So this is just something that one teacher wanted to do, and now many of the teachers are already using it. So just by talking to them, we can implement it into the rooms, and they can start using it. And then, if it works, more of the teacher will start using it.
So we do something like that, but we use a platform called Flipgrid. I don't know if you've come across that.
No.
So it uses your mobile phone or the laptop camera. It does something very similar, but allows that commentary amongst networks. Very useful.
This is also very interesting that up until now we have only been discussing what's going on within the building or within the campus, but you also have the lecture on demand, which is more and more lecture capture, content management. I know in junior high in Norway, they have trying now something called flipped learning, where the teacher makes a video where he or she goes through the material for that class, and the homework is to watch that video, and afterwards they will go through the actual work with those theories in class instead of vice versa.
That's the active learning element of it, is it?
Yeah. We use that in combination with the room. So a lot of teachers come in our studio and do recordings for the lectures, and then send out the lectures to students in the media platform, and then the students can have more focused work in the groups, and just really short lectures within the new classrooms. Yeah.
And how does that work, generally speaking? Is this piloting, or is it actually in full production?
Oh, no, we have 50 rooms that automated recording, but we also have 2 different studios and 3 studios where the teachers can go in and do their own videos, and also software where the teachers can do their own recordings.
I think that self-service is a useful model as well. We try and empower academic staff to take out little cameras, little Mevos like the thing I've got down there for live streaming or webinars, or to be able to use Camtasia or any of the things that you'd expect, or the lecture capture platform that we have just through a browser you can capture if you need. And I think all of those technologies are great, but it needs stewardship. It needs people to guide them to it, show them why it's useful and why it may be useful in the context of their curricular design and their delivery, and then help them get the best out of that tool set. Because without that element, it's just another thing for somebody to learn, so they'll be hesitant, reluctant to engage.
Yeah. Is this a particular kind of lecturer that does this sort of thing? Is it a particular type of person? Do you start to understand who you can work with and who you can't?
We have some early adopters, and those are always the ones that goes out first. And when they see how happy the students are with this, also the other lecturers see this, and they also want to be a good lecturer, of course. So they try to adopt whatever works. And flipped learning absolutely has good credentials at us, but it's still really early. So it's early adopters, I would say. But a lot of people are coming in now, and especially within also these rooms now. We're making it more available to people, making it super simple. Just put one USB in and do a recording, and yeah.
I think you've got 10% who will always be your sort of early adopters and your champions of new technology, because they're also technologists at heart actually, and they're just applying that to their delivery or their learning and teaching practice. I think the chunk in the middle are the group that we probably can reach and can target, because actually with a bit of encouragement, if you can articulate the genuine benefit that an offer in a room or a platform or a piece of technology may bring to their teaching, then they might give it a shot. But then there are a group of people who maybe aren't going to shift as quickly as we'd hope towards new pedagogy, new approach, new delivery, and we just have to accept that. But if you can encourage the vast majority of people to engage, then you're doing a reasonable job.
Yeah, they have to choose it themselves, because if we push technology on them, they will never use it. So
that's right.
They have to want it themselves.
Yes,
you have to trick them into thinking that they want it. Yeah.
Well, it's very reassuring to hear that, because you're back to the personal skills is what AV is all about, isn't it? Yeah. So people think I like to see IT doing this, but it's good to see IT and AV working together. It's certainly the academic environment. I'm sure business could learn a lot from that. Actually, I mean, all the ones we've seen, including Adam's, and yours, obviously, it's gone pretty well. Which takes me then, how well do integrators? Clearly you're on a learning curve with this, aren't you? But how well do integrators serve the HE community in Norway? I mean, do they know the requirements? I'll start in the UK in a minute, but just seeing from what's happening abroad, from our point of view, we're eager to learn, from what you're doing. Is how close and how well do you supply their needs? We have all kinds of things in our country we can talk about, but how well do people have to understand HE's needs over there? Because in a fast-changing environment, how do you cope with potentially sometimes impossible demands? And for example, elements of standardization, making networking work in difficult situations where perhaps expectations are high and delivery is perhaps less high, and so on. You're into new territory a bit here, aren't you?
Yeah, we're kind of gadget geeks ourselves. So in many cases, we tend to tell the customer all the newest, latest technology, what that can do, and in many cases we are talking to gadget freaks that also say, well, this sounds great, we'll have that, but they don't think ahead of the people they are serving, say in a business or whatever. So you get a bit too high technological level, which is so we sell them a great system, but they don't do their work afterwards on teaching the people how to use it. They were talking about evangelists here. So you also need the technology is only as good as the knowledge of the user. So a good example is when all schools starting using smartboards, because that was the new big thing. So Every class in every school should have a interactive board, but very few teachers knew what to do with it. So in most cases, it became just a rather expensive screen. And they started using it as a whiteboard. So it was afterwards, after a while, it was not actually useful as a screen anymore either.
Very similar to UK, I think.
Yeah. So we try to in our design to focus on the less skilled user. How should a person that gets into this room for the first time in an easy way connect and get to use this? For say Skype for Business, that is pulling up the USB, connecting it, and without the need of installing any drivers, and everything should just configure itself, and you should get a image on the display as well.
You have a similar sort of or not similar?
Well, so
Mixed users.
We're at one of the largest global collections of gadget geeks, as you referred to us as a broad group. And I think it's really important to recognize that the language that flows between integrators and AV teams in organizations, whether that's corporate or whether it's public sector, it doesn't really matter. That's very different than the language of the end user. And I think that's really what you're kind of driving home to. I think I'm going to be really blunt, and it's going to be unpopular, and that's absolutely fine. No is the answer to your question. I don't think we currently have the right relationship between the integrators, the manufacturers, and the end users and the customers. And I think that balance needs to shift very clearly towards us understanding our own requirements. And I don't think we're as good at articulating our requirements as perhaps we should be, and that's on us. And then I think it's about building those relationships with integrators so that then they have a much better understanding of the pedagogy that we're trying to deliver.
Very well said. I'm conscious of running up to our 4 o'clock time. It started a bit late, I have to say. Any questions so far from people? I'm just dying to throw this catch box out. Very selfish reason for throwing it. But how are you all? Are you all from education, or are you interested parties who think, well, this looks rather interesting, let's sit down and have a look? Anybody from higher education? Jolly good. But it's sitting very quietly over there. Do you agree with what's been said here, or have you any sort of experiences of your own you'd like to share with us, perhaps, about technology integration and what problems you've got? Any particular? He's there, you see. I'm dying to throw it out there. There you go. Well done. Well held, sir. He's not plugged in.
Right, here we go.
Oh.
No, it was about the integrator, the relationship with the integrator, and I sort of agree with what Marcus said. In some of our projects, we're having to really drag them along with us, because I think in universities we're trying to push the boundaries of technology, but actually to make a nice user experience. And like you said, I'm not sure that the integrator fully understands that relationship that we have with the end user. And Marcus is right, absolutely. It's on us to try and get that across. But at the moment, in some of our recent projects here, we are actually pulling them along with us in that journey, which is...
Is there a lot of bespoking work done? I suppose a lot of it is fairly, isn't it?
Well, absolutely, yeah.
And that's only going to increase, isn't it, presumably?
As you build or take away that technology, to not create a barrier, everything has to be really properly designed. It's not as much off-the-shelf stuff as there used to be, really, because it's trying to engage with so many different people in so many different ways. Everyone learns and teaches very differently, so to try and give them the tools they need to do that is actually becoming quite challenging.
How?
Christian?
Yes. In many cases, when it comes to higher ed, there's usually more than one system integrator involved because it's usually too big a task for one system integrator to be the sole supplier of AV systems for a large university. So the different system integrators you have leans towards their products, which they know, so and their solutions.
Yeah.
So and also we need say like an interface, which is probably a person or more, that can be or is a user group. Maybe that's maybe the best. Take the least skilled people that will be using the AV systems, put them in a user group, invite the system integrators and tell us how the user experience should be.
I think corporates have got this, probably they're a bit further down the line than the HE sector, just in the sense that the HE sector is very fragmented. So because investment cycles tend to be different buildings, different times, is it 5 years, is it 7 years, what is it? But room specifications for large corporates, Deloitte or Bloomberg, I was talking to Darren from Bloomberg for the recent London HQ about the same thing. It's about having that really fine control over what the specifications are and sticking doggedly to those specifications, so that whichever integrator essentially is on your campus, you understand what you want the end result to be, and any variance from that is very tightly controlled. Yeah. I don't think we have that maturity, actually, if I'm being completely honest. I think some organisations do. Some HEs do have that maturity, others don't.
The university college in Trondheim that was acquired by his university a few years ago, they hired one of the systems integrators to build a graphic user interface that should be available for any system integrator supplying an AV system to that college. So they did, and then they were having a user group that did all the beta testing, and yes. So the system integrator got a fair share of money for doing the job, and the design was partly suggestions from the integrator and partly feedback from the user group. So the result they ended up with would then be available. It will be the property of the university college, and then made available for. And they say that if you are to supply an AV system for us, this is the layout you should use.
But we need to go back a step and actually embed this type of thinking in work with manufacturers, so the products coming through the pipeline are better suited to the environments that we're building for. I think that's the logical next step. If you have many universities have a dedicated programmer that they always go to, and so essentially they have a consultant programmer rather than use the integrators programmer as a way of getting that consistency. But actually, how do we start when there's a fundamental need and that you're having to cobble things together from all sorts of different angles, maybe using some bespoke technologies or programming or boxes, then that solution isn't going to be as robust as if you go and talk to manufacturers and say, what's really been missing from the pipeline here is this feature. Can we please have that in our products? Yeah. Because actually we need that in our rooms.
Good, I think we're running to time actually now. Room for one more question if we can squeeze one in, but otherwise... Oh, there you go, now's the chance. Well done. Well held, sir.
I think I just want to say one thing, and that is what we experience in Oslo is that sometimes we meet 80% salespersons and 20% technicians, and we have to drive the technology ourselves. And I think that is a pity. The problem is that they want turnover and sales before making good systems.
That's interesting, isn't it? I mean, you know, well, we have a procurement process as well where everybody complains they don't have enough time to supply a product to the market that's potentially of impossible specification. Are they going to make money out of it? Can they supply it in time? Who's going to supply it? But it's an odd one in the UK, isn't it, really? Is the market big enough, and is it worth their while doing it? That's a sad indictment from an integrator to say that, but, you know, we are where we are, aren't we? It's a multi-million-pound market in the UK, so I think they've, you know, and a lot of work is becoming more bespoke. So for what I've seen, so it's commoditised stuff now. They can do it.
The framework agreements. I think they're simultaneously a good thing and a bad thing. I know that's really it's not a very satisfactory answer, but I've had, you know, there are some things that they're good for, and there are some things they're really really bad for, like consultancy in the UK. You can't procure consultancy really through the HE frameworks. It's very tricky to do. So on large projects, I think that there are really two choices. Either you go to market, you run your own competitive processes, or you build an in-house capability and capacity. I think they're the two choices. And you know, we're erring towards building in-house capability and capacity.
Yeah. That's what we do. We have a thumb rule that says that we do not outsource anything that we don't know ourselves really good.
Yeah.
Because we see the demand for it, actually.
I think that's very wise. Yeah.
Right, Christian, Magnus, and Marcus, Christian, and Christian. Gentlemen, thanks very much for demystifying. Amazing, an hour's gone by. Incredible. Thank you so much for your attention. Hope that sorted a few things out. Anyway, interesting discussion, as it always is. Thank you.